Ahoy! Today we're talking about Super Squad, and this may honestly be one of my favorite videos that I ever made on this channel. And that's because the developers of this game reached out to me and asked me if I could do an honest review for this game, where I can say whatever I want while getting sponsored to do so. So this video is sponsored by Bad Fox Studios. Before we get into the review, the beta for Super Squad is still live for a couple of hours right now before it goes back up tomorrow. So if you want to try it out, you can find all the links down below in the description, and then you can come back for the review later if you want. Now, what is Super Squad? The developers describe it as a new genre, calling it Mosh. When I hear Mosh, I think of this. In this context, however, it stands for Multiplayer Online Shoot 'em Up. It is from a top-down perspective, and the game has guns as well as abilities. The team says they're essentially trying to emulate the late-game stage of MOBA teamfights without having the entire build-up to it. This isn't entirely new. For example, Battlerite did something similar, but Super Squad leans a lot more to the shooter side. Currently, the game is still in beta, and playtests are every weekend from 12 noon to 12 midnight on Saturday and Sunday, but on the 25th of June, so this month, it'll go into early access. From that point on, there will be EU, NA, and Singapore servers, which are up 24/7. Because of the early stage, a lot of things are changing very quickly in the game. A lot of things that I will be talking about are subject to change, so keep that in mind. The game is currently available on both Steam as well as the Epic Games Launcher, with controller support being worked on and a console launch being planned in the future. I actually had the chance to play with the devs themselves, who gave me a little bit more info about the game, and they spun up the Singapore servers for us, so keep in mind that everyone in this matches is playing with at least a little bit of ping. Now let's go a little bit more in depth on the game. In Super Squad, you can be anything from a generic soldier, a robot, to a dwarf, or a goat. So you know what I'm picking. Well, only that the goat's not available yet. That's the next character to come out. Unlucky. Currently, there are two different game modes with multiple different maps for each of them. The first one, Domination, is a point capture mode. Your team needs to hold more points than the enemy team for a longer amount of time to reach more overall points. This is the beginner mode, and obviously very straightforward because everyone is familiar with the format. The other mode is Strike. In Strike, you need to collect 10 keys that drop from the sky and that you can either collect directly or take from enemies, and the first team to get 10 keys launches a missile. This switches the mode to its second stage. Here, the team that has activated the missile needs to defend the missile while it's launching, while the other team tries to prevent the launch from happening by destroying the launch site. Due to its less familiar nature and the higher emphasis of teamwork, this is the mode for more advanced players. However, more game modes are already in the works. A team deathmatch is already announced, and a surge mode will follow in the future as well. The long-term plan is to have lots of maps and lots of game modes. However, that obviously comes with the risk of splitting the player base too much, and I asked the developers what they want to do about that. One thing they're planning to do is to rotate certain maps and modes, but more importantly, there is a player choice option. The game has a voting system for which mode you're going to play, as well as later on we'll have the option to vote for maps as well. Now let's talk a bit about the characters. There are 3 different classes: Damage, Tank, and Healer, so all very self-explanatory. All of these classes and characters within these classes have different stats. They vary in health, speed, gun range, gun damage, rate of fire, and the number of dodges available to them. Currently, the team is working on additional features that'll set the characters apart a little bit further. For example, they're working on a close-range character with a shotgun, and they're working on damage scaling with distance on certain characters. As of now, aside of their unique stats and the number of dodges, each character has 2 unique abilities. According to the roadmap, eventually each character will have 3 unique abilities. These abilities range from extra damage, crowd control, mobility, to team utility and healing, so the standard MOBA abilities essentially. Now technically, if you go out of combat for 8 seconds, you start self-healing and then heal relatively quickly. However, healing abilities can keep you in combat much longer and fight much more efficiently, making at least 1 healer per comp almost necessary at the moment. That said, the currently available healers can also choose to use their healing skills for damage, and then they can deal pretty ridiculous amounts of damage. That said, the developers are already looking to nerf the healers a little bit because their damage is just a little bit too strong right now. Each character that I had the chance to play so far definitely felt unique, but there are some shared perks for each class. So they're different between the classes, but within the class they are the same. These are passives that you can buy at the shop during the match, and they give your character additional benefits. For example, the damage class has a passive called Hunting the Weak. If you play Smite, then you're familiar with Thanatos, and it's very similar to that. When an enemy close to you is below 25% health, then you gain 25% movement speed. A more expensive passive, and you can have 2 at a time, is Kill Shield, which gives you a shield after killing an enemy. Bloodforge anyone? At a later stage, additional consumables are also planned, as well as class-specific active abilities, which are essentially ultimates that every character of a class can buy. Before you're able to get any of these things, you'll need to farm some points. That highlighted one of the issues I ran into, which is that it's super easy to forget about the shops. Especially if you're not dying too much in a game, there is very little incentive to even go back to the shops, and I think this is maybe something that the team may have to look into and consider if it's necessary to have to go to the shop on the map specifically, because effectively you're giving up pressure to get those things. This can of course be a conscious decision, but it didn't feel that great to have to walk down to that shop or die for it when I was holding a point. There are 2 characters that stood out to me that kind of demonstrate the opposing ends of what is possible in this game a little bit, that I wanted to talk about a little bit more. The first one is Xandark, who is an alien assassin and very much the archetypical assassin in this game. She has a relatively small health pool and low range, but a very high rate of fire with her throwing knives. One of her abilities is a poison bomb that will deal AoE damage and create a poison zone that deals some damage to enemies walking into it as well. Her other ability is a backstab in good old Loki fashion. She teleports behind an enemy, stabbing in the back, locking them in place and dealing high damage. Now keep in mind that everyone is ranged, and having an enemy close to you that has a relatively short range is a huge problem. And to make matters worse, Xandark also has 3 dodges, so much more than most other characters, meaning she has insanely high mobility, and if she teleports on you, you'll have a really hard time getting away. On the other hand, this also makes a very obvious counterplay, because if you can predict her backstab, then you can just use your dash when it happens and avoid the CC as well as the damage, and then just turn her engage back on her, especially if you have some allies around. On the other hand of the character spectrum, we have Florb. Now Florb actually belongs to the same theme, because he's also a sci-fi character, whereas other factions are fantasy, pirate and military. But other than that, he's very different. He has a higher health pool and longer range, but a slower rate of fire and less dodges. One of his abilities, Transfusion, allows him to put a lifesteal buff on himself or an ally temporarily. His other ability is Splosion. Splosion is a sticky grenade that'll stick to whoever you throw it at. It can stick to an ally, or it can stick to an enemy, or you can throw it on the ground and it'll stick to whoever touches it. If an ally gets it, they get healed. If an enemy gets it, they take damage. And that means you constantly have to decide what to do with it. Do you want to burst an enemy, or do you want to heal an ally? Or do you want to heal yourself? Or do you want to deny an area? Or do you want to throw down a heal in an area that your ally can potentially pick up if they feel the need to? And since the explosion is AoE, the allies around the ally are also affected, so you can hit multiple enemies with the damage or multiple allies with the heal. The resulting decisions, especially when factoring in the wind-up and the relatively slow travel range of the projectile as well, are very interesting and make fighting with him very unique. Unfortunately, I also ran into some ping-related bugs with him. Sometimes one of his abilities wasn't usable until I used the other one again, which are hopefully being fixed soon. Generally speaking, combat in the game felt very fluid and easy to pick up. There are distinct differences between the characters that make it so that you want to change up your playstyle depending on who you're facing, because sometimes there are relatively telegraphed abilities that you want to avoid. Reading abilities like this is especially important in the context of using your dodges as well. Ability cooldowns are relatively long considering the fast-paced nature of the game, meaning in some stages the game relies relatively heavily on the guns, where at which there would be a bit more impact of the abilities, which I think will be solved by introducing the third ability as well as the purchasable, essentially, ultimate. One thing that I didn't like as much about the combat is that certain abilities and shots felt like they lacked a little bit of impact or feedback. Some sounds of certain shots are really juicy and the numbers are very clear as well, but there seemed to be a distinct difference between the weight between certain attacks. Essentially, some shots have much clearer feedback for hitting an enemy than others. So overall, I like the combat, but I think it could have more weight both in terms of the feel as well as the decisions and their consequences. When it comes to the depth of the game, the developers specifically stated that they wanted to not be too deep. They want Super Squad to be accessible without having to learn a bunch of items first or specific rules. There's definitely still a significant skill cap, especially through trying to aim the abilities though. Some of the abilities are really hard to land. Going back to the game modes a little bit, matches in both modes seem to last around 15 minutes. I felt like they could be a little bit shorter, but not much shorter, because at that point the game would also make for a nice option to play while in queue in another game. In Domination specifically, I felt like the respawn timer might need some adjustments because they function similar to the arena respawn in Smite, and they often feel almost more rewarding than trying to regenerate your health, so you can almost make strategical suicides when your healer isn't around. When it comes to the strike mode, I didn't really get enough experience in that, but it might need some more balancing for some RNG of the key drops, because they spawn all over the map, and it felt very, very, very hard, almost impossible, to stop a missile launch once it was initiated, unless you had a coordinated team with comms. You need to take down 4 generators almost at once, and I can't see how that would happen with a team of randoms. On the topic of game modes, Ranked is planned to launch on the 25th of this month with the early access, so that'll be available basically from the start. When it comes to monetization, the game itself is free to play, and the money will be made through skins, podiums, avatars, emotes, and upcoming battle passes. There's some critical points that I wanted to bring up outside of this. Obviously, the visual style of this game isn't particularly flashy. You could say that's par for the course for an indie game, but I think there's some more potential there even within the confines of this visual style. And I think this is important, especially when it comes to the character model, because the visual first impression of a game is usually what counts when people make the decision if they even want to try it out. While the feature to turn your camera exists in the game, it's currently so slow that it feels very painful to use. I know that's being worked on though. The obstacles on certain maps are sometimes a little bit hard to read, and it's hard to tell if your projectile is going to go past an obstacle or stop on the obstacle, which makes combat a little bit awkward in those particular places. And last but not least, as much as the game likes to present itself as this new format, I don't think the game's main concept is incredibly unique. Instead, I think the value of Super Squad will come from how much it is able to set itself apart from the competition and how well it is executed. Most modern games are to some degree based on existing concepts, and often the winner is the one that has the most polish. All in all, Super Squad is definitely fun, and if I didn't have to make this video today, I would have jumped into the beta again just to give it another spin. I think the format is very promising, and since the devs are very quick to adapt to feedback and are very quickly bringing changes into the game, it seems like something that is evolving in the right direction right now. There's definitely still room for improvement with a lot of new characters, with new abilities coming in, and various changes to the mechanics, which will mean that once this game is through early access, it'll probably be a very different game and much more advanced game from what it is right now. But I would definitely recommend trying it out. From my perspective, it is mostly a quick, fun, casual game. You maybe hop into 1 or 2 matches, and then you hop off again, and you come back whenever. There will most certainly be a grindy hardcore fan base as well, but for me personally, I think it's a fun one to just play a little bit in between. And again, I also think it will be a great queue game if they cut down the game time just a little bit. One of the toughest things for smaller games is always to find a footing and survive, and I hope that'll be the case for Super Squad. If you want to assist that, and if you want to try it out, all the links are down below. Again, beta is going on right now, will be going on from 12 noon UTC tomorrow as well, and then in 2 weeks time, on the 25th, there will also be the early access and you can play it all the time. You'll also find the website with some more info as well as the Discord down below, and on the Discord they announce all the changes in playtests and everything. Again, thanks to Bad Fox Studios and Super Squad for sponsoring this video. This was most certainly the most fun sponsorship that I ever made, and it was absolutely enjoyable to work with them. And I hope you guys will give Super Squad a try, maybe catch me in game. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you for the next one soon. Click like and subscribe if you haven't yet. Duke, out.